This mercenary man goes to a shopping store every day to pick her favorite beer. But one day, some gang member with their skibidi accent come to introduce themselves as losers. As they pointed their gun at the mercenary, they didn't realize this could be their last mistake. Mercenaries stared at them and thinking of thousands of methods to kill each of them. But at the peak moment, Loser's gang member's boss rushed in.
Yes, Daddy!
He said to the mercenary, and after hearing daddy word, he forgive his sons, or you can say daughters in skin of mans, whatever.
It was in Los Angeles in April 1992. Former convict Merc is trying to rebuild his life and mend his relationship with his son, Twan, a schoolboy. Twan struggles to get along with his strict father, but after losing his mom and grandma recently, he has no choice but to stay with him. They live in a tiny apartment but are managing to make it work as they don't have any other option right now. One day, Merc reminded Twan to come straight home after school since riots were expected in the city that day. Elsewhere, Riggin, a skilled safecracker, had his own strained relationship with his father, Lowell. He didn't want to deal with him at all, but his father, who had spent a year planning a heist, needed Riggin's expertise to pull it off. Meanwhile, Mercer stopped at a store where two thugs stormed in, insulting the cashier and causing chaos. Mercer confronted them, but one thug pulled out a gun, pressing it against Mercer's head. Just then, the gang leader entered and de-escalated the situation. The leader warned the gangster to not mess with Mercer as they weren't aware about Mercer's past. The gang wanted Mercer back in their crew, but he chose an honest path instead, taking a job at a factory. Ironically, this factory was the target of Riggin's father's heist plan. The factory processed platinum, storing $10 million worth of it, 400 kilograms in total in a safe with 18 inches thick walls. Opening it required 2 keys and a code. The plan was to enter through the loading bay where the safe was located at the far end of the room. The key was to prevent the guards from pressing the alarm button. Failure would spell disaster. Lowell hesitated, calling the plan too risky due to the tight security and surveillance cameras. He decided to back out and also warned his sons Riggin and Dennis to do the same. At the factory, Mercer was welcomed kindly by Joseph, a security guard, despite Mercer's troubled past. During his shift, Mercer overheard on TV that the cops who had beaten Rodney King were acquitted. The unarmed black man had been struck over 50 times with batons. Outraged, Los Angeles residents began rioting immediately. As promised, Twan came straight home after school, only to find an angry mob forming outside. Gunshots echoed as black residents smashed store windows and overturned cars. The factory director allowed workers to leave early to avoid getting caught in the chaos. Riggin realized the riots could be the perfect cover for their heist. At home, Dennis was sitting on the couch, watching cartoons and eating cereal. Riggin ordered him to get ready as they were putting the plan into motion immediately. Dennis confirmed from him if he had taken Lowell's permission, to which Riggin lied that he had. The fourth member of their gang was Riggin's best friend, Copeland. Copeland's pregnant wife stayed home, waiting for him to return. At the factory, Joseph was the only guard left on duty. Mercer asked him if he could bring Twan to the factory so they could stay safe together. Mercer knew their neighborhood was dangerous, and now the situation was spiraling out of control. Joseph agreed to it. Lowell, also liking Riggins' idea, joined them for the heist. He decided to bring in 2 more accomplices, Titus and Murphy. They both are experienced robbers. Riggin grew tense, distrusting these strangers. Mercer struggled to navigate the chaos in the streets, driving under the cover of protests. Protesters were looting nearby stores and clashing with police. When Mercer finally reached home, he discovered Twan was already gone. Tension continued to escalate in the streets. At the same time, Riggin and Lowell with their team drove to the factory in a van. The police were too overwhelmed by the riots to notice them. At the factory checkpoint, Riggin got out and distracted the guard before using a taser to knock him out. The gang tied up the guard and drove onto the factory premises. Inside, Joseph was about to take a break for a snack when 6 shady figures appeared in front of him. Riggin hoped to avoid violence, but Joseph reached for his gun. Murphy shot Joseph without hesitation. Furious, Riggin confronted Murphy, and the two pointed their guns at each other. Lowell quickly intervened, ordering them to calm down and get back to work. Dennis, shaken, felt uneasy about the entire situation. As night fell, Mercer searched desperately for Twan. The same gangster leader offered him a gun, urging him to join the looting, but Mercer refused. Chaos erupted all around, but the gang worked methodically. They moved a forklift loaded with tools to the safe, ready to crack it open. Mercer finally found Twan watching a mob loot a store, grabbing whatever they could. Enraged, Mercer grabbed Twan by the collar and dragged him back to the car. Meanwhile, Joseph, miraculously still alive, was crawling toward the security alarm as the robbers drilled into the safe. Everything was going smoothly for the gang until the alarm blared. To their shock, a massive steel box began descending onto the safe. Riggin quickly jumped onto the forklift forklift and stopped the structure just in time, but in doing so, he accidentally crushed Copeland's leg. The gang was in a dire situation as they couldn't move the forklift, and freeing Copeland meant amputating his leg. To stop Riggin from interfering, Murphy grabbed the forklift's ignition key. Lowell made it clear they would only deal with Copeland's leg after cracking the safe. Titus deactivated the alarm and killed the wounded security guard, Joseph. Meanwhile, police officers in a helicopter were heading toward the factory for inspection. At the same time, Mercer and Twan were driving there too. The chaos in the city continued to escalate. Twan, restless in the car, expressed his desire to join the protests.
These cops get to run through our hoods, doing whatever the fuck they want to do to us, but we can't express ourselves?
Mercer pleaded with him to stop being reckless, explaining that such actions only hurt their own community. As they drove, they saw two thugs attacking a young white couple trying to steal their car. The man defending the car was about to get hurt when Mercer stepped in, brutally beating the attackers. Without saying much, he returned to the car and continued driving to the factory. Meanwhile, the gang pressed on with their attempt to crack the safe. Copeland's leg was amputated, and the youngest member of the gang, Dennis, stayed back to care for him. The group managed to drill a small hole in the steel door, just big enough to plant explosives. They paused when a police helicopter flew overhead, but the cops only glanced at the building and moved on. Twan, still hyped from watching his father take down the thugs earlier, couldn't contain his excitement. Mercer, however, grew somber. He questioned whether he even knows what he is afraid of most. He doesn't want him to grow up to be like him. Mercer admitted there was nothing about his own life he was proud of. Their car was soon stopped at a checkpoint by the police, who were enforcing the curfew. A white family ahead of them was allowed through without any issue, but Mercer and Twan weren't as lucky. Frustrated by the blatant discrimination, Twan began arguing with the cops. In response, the officers slammed him onto the hood of the car, handcuffing him, and even pointed a gun at Mercer. Twan broke down in tears. After searching the car and finding nothing illegal, the police reluctantly let them go, but not without throwing out threats. Back at the factory, the gang finally blew the safe open, revealing stacks of small platinum bars were enough to make them millionaires. Lowell was proud of his son, Riggin, and couldn't wait to celebrate. The gang began loading the platinum into the van as quickly as possible. Mercer arrived at the factory and was surprised that the guard wasn't there to greet him. He opened the gates himself, feeling uneasy. Meanwhile, Twan asked to use the restroom. Inside, he ran into Dennis, who pointed a gun at him. At the same time, Mercer discovered Joseph's lifeless body. Horrified, he took the guard's gun for protection. As he walked down the hallway, one of the gang members ambushed him and opened fire. Startled, Mercer dropped the gun and ran, frantically searching for Twan. But when he reached the restroom, Twan was already gone. The gang realized Mercer was inside the factory and started hunting him down with flashlights. Mercer grabbed a pipe and struck Titus, leaving the burly man reeling. He kept running and eventually spotted Riggin pulling up in the van. Mercer knocked him out cold and took his gun. Meanwhile, Copeland, legless and in critical condition, struggled to breathe. Dennis brought Twan to the gang leader, who immediately began interrogating the boy, demanding to know why he was there. At the same time, Mercer interrogated Riggin, trying to extract information. Mercer growled that he doesn't know who he is messing with. Though tempted to finish off the thief, he ultimately decided against it and simply knocked him out again. Climbing through the roof into the factory, Mercer spotted a creepy gray-haired man talking to Twan. It was Lowell. Copeland, who was already in critical condition, started wheezing uncontrollably again, angering Lowell. Frustrated, Lowell shot Copeland without hesitation. This left Dennis in shock after seeing what his father is capable of doing. Lowell turned back to Twan. He decided to let the boy go, but not before issuing a chilling threat. Holding Twan's ID, he sneered that if he goes to the police, he'll find him and kill his entire family. Terrified, Twan began slowly walking toward the exit. Before Twan could leave, the gang's accomplices rushed in, alerting Lowell that someone else had infiltrated the factory. Lowell immediately ordered Twan to stay, realizing the intruder was likely the boy's father, someone Twan had mentioned earlier. He decided to use Twan as bait. Meanwhile, Titus discovered that the rotor had been removed from the van, rendering it useless. Dennis wanted to search for his missing brother, Riggin, but Lowell, more concerned about getting the platinum out, ordered everyone to continue loading the precious metal into the van. Mercer, outside, attempted to attract the attention of the police as their helicopter flew over the factory again. Unfortunately, instead of the police noticing him, Murphy, the bearded thug, spotted him. Murphy attacked from behind, relentlessly beating Mercer while demanding he return the van's rotor. A brutal fight broke out. Murphy managed to knock Mercer's gun away and strike him with a metal pipe. However, Mercer recovered quickly, retrieved the gun, and shot Murphy. Murphy's lifeless body tumbled down to where the rest of the gang was. Returning to Riggin, Mercer told Riggin about how his gang doesn't follow honor among the thieves. The old man, Lowell, wants to leave Riggin behind and get out with the platinum bars. Mercer was angry as Lowell also shot his man, Copeland. Riggin, visibly shaken, hesitated as Mercer stared him down. Back with the gang, Lowell and his crew continued their desperate efforts to deal with the platinum, while the situation spiraled further out of control. Dennis asked Twan to be honest with him and tell him whether he knows his brother or not. Twan told him that he did not know anything. Riggin explained that his father, Lowell, is completely heartless, and it was a miracle that Mercer's son is still alive. However, since Twan had witnessed a murder, his fate seemed grim. Just then, Lowell pointed a gun at the boy, forcing him to plead with his father to save him on the microphone. Lowell then proposed a deal. He'd trade Twan for his own son, Riggin, plus the rotor for the van. Riggin warned Mercer not to trust Lowell. He'll kill both him and his boy. Mercer asked in desperation to help him get his son back. During the exchange, Titus immediately grabbed the rotor and sprinted to the van, starting the engine. Meanwhile, Lowell aimed his gun at Twan, ready to pull the trigger. What he didn't anticipate was that his eldest son, Riggin, had already conspired with Mercer. Together, they opened fire on Lowell. In the ensuing chaos, Dennis was shot in the back. Despite his injury, he managed to climb into the van with Riggin, which Mercer was driving with Twan in the front seat. Mercer, Twan, Riggin, and the injured Dennis hoped to escape together. However, as Mercer opened the gates, the gang closed in on them. Lowell, as expected, showed no concern for his sons. His real goal was the platinum loaded into the van. Dennis's condition worsened as he desperately needed medical attention, but Lavelle, cold and ruthless, ordered Titus to shoot at the fleeing van. Dennis succumbed to his injuries, dying in front of his brother, Riggin. Enraged, Riggin returned fire, wounding Titus. However, Titus managed to aim one last time, shooting Riggin. Mercer, now fueled by rage, turned his attention to Lowell, determined to end him. The two exchanged gunfire, but Lowell was quicker, shooting Mercer in the shoulder. Distracted by his victory, Lowell didn't notice the van veering off course. It collided with another vehicle and flipped over, scattering the platinum everywhere. Lowell got out of the car and saw Riggin hanging by thread for his life on the road. Lowell stood over Riggin, taunting him that he did everything he could and he is sorry it wasn't enough. Lowell prepared to finish Riggin off. As Lowell was about to shoot Mercer, Twan, fueled by anger and desperation, shot Lowell in the back, killing him instantly. With Lowell dead, Mercer and Twan climbed into a car, leaving behind a scene of carnage. Twan glanced back at the pile of bodies, his face contorted with grief, and broke down in tears. Father and son drove home in silence, the weight of what they had endured hanging heavily between them.